Final Fantasy VII is easily one of the most beloved video games of all time, a landmark RPG that shaped the genre and left an everlasting impact on gaming history. And when it comes to disappointing sequels, some of you might immediately think of Final Fantasy VIII. Jokes aside, despite having its own dedicated fanbase, it never quite captured the same universal acclaim or mainstream adoration as its predecessor. But of course, it's not the game we're here to talk about today. When I say sequel, I'm not referring to the next numbered entry in the series, but rather a direct continuation of Final Fantasy VII's story. One that attempted to expand the beloved world of Midgar, but instead left many fans scratching their heads in confusion. I'm referring to the utterly bizarre Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, a PlayStation 2 title that continues the beloved tale of Final Fantasy VII in one of the strangest ways imaginable. Because really, why stick with the RPG mechanics that your entire audience loves when you can instead release an outlandish third-person shooter? This game took everyone's favourite brooding edgelord, Vincent Valentine, and forced him into an experience so wildly different from what Final Fantasy fans actually wanted that most of them simply didn't bother with this one. Packed to the brim with gunplay, explosions, and a convoluted narrative that even die-hard Final Fantasy fans struggled to take seriously, it quickly became clear why so many comparisons to Shadow the Hedgehog would be made. However, is this title and its story as awful as many would have you believe it to be, or is it merely awful in comparison to one of the greatest video games ever made? Let's find out. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, the sequel no one asked for. Yeah! The infamous Dirge of Cerberus first landed on the PlayStation 2 in 2006, and given how radically different it was from its predecessors, many fans either ignored it entirely or gave it a try, only to promptly forget it existed or in some cases actively suppress the memory. As a result, plenty of people were quick to dismiss its story and characters as non-canon, especially in relation to both the original Final Fantasy VII and later the remake trilogy. However, in more recent years, that assumption came crashing down, with the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrades Yuffie DLC, Episode Intermission. As this expansion not only directly sets up what transpires in Dirge of Cerberus, but directly pulled elements and characters from it, proving that whether fans like it or not, Square Enix hadn't forgotten about Vincent Valentine's bizarre solo outing. This game is damn canon, and now there's absolutely no denying it. What's more is that Episode Intermission didn't just throw in a subtle nod to Dirge of Cerberus, it actively incorporated key elements from it, solidifying its place in Final Fantasy VII's overarching narrative. This made me curious enough to go back and check out the maligned PS2 title that I intentionally skipped in the past. That's the magic of Final Fantasy VII Remake and its expansions. It's not just a retelling, it's a bold reimagining that breathes new life into the world and its characters. Episode Intermission is a prime example, and I absolutely loved these experiences. Exploring the vast world in Rebirth also felt like a childhood dream come true, and if you haven't played these games yet, I highly recommend you do. Even better, by using my affiliate link you can get a massive 45% off the newly released PC version of Rebirth, along with big discounts on the Remake and Rebirth Twin Pack, which also includes Intermission. Save big on thousands of games using my links and enjoy the rest of the video. When Final Fantasy VII Advent Children was in development, the movie sequel to Final Fantasy VII, the team at Square Enix quickly realised that a single game wouldn't be enough to fully explore the vast world of the beloved JRPG. This led to the creation of Before Crisis, the lost prequel and mobile game we recently looked at on here. Another sequel, Crisis Core for the PSP, and of course Dirge of Cerberus for the PS2. Each of these was designed to expand the lore and dive deeper into different aspects of the universe. And love it or hate it, Dirge of Cerberus certainly achieved this. In the early days, with no official confirmation from Square Enix about Dirge of Cerberus' genre, speculation ran wild, with many assuming it would be an action-packed experience akin to Devil May Cry. However, in 2004, character designer Tetsuya Nomura shot down those rumours, teasing that the game's genre would take fans by surprise. And surprise it did, because instead of Devil May Cry, we got Vincent May Try. Well, try to star in a third-person shooter that plays like Final Fantasy awkwardly cosplaying as Gears of War. Unfortunately, Vincent Valentine didn't get the memo about taking cover. It's absolutely crazy to me that this game exists, and that producer, Yoshinori Katase, ultimately decided to make this one a shooting game, a creation which was allegedly driven by his passion for first-person shooters and the challenge of creating something outside the studio's usual comfort zone. But personally, I believe there is most likely a little more to this story than that. You see, back in the mid-2000s, Western game developers were going through a bit of a phase, one drenched in dull greys, excessive bloom lighting, and an overwhelming amount of gunfire. It was an era of gritty realism, where every protagonist had to be a grizzled anti-hero, and every battlefield was a war-torn wasteland of muted colours. This was the time when Gears of War became the poster child for third-person shooters, setting a trend that would dominate for years. Everything had to look serious and dark. The success of Max Payne 2, SOCOM, and The Punisher showed that Western audiences craved these sort of games, but taking Final Fantasy VII, of all things, in this direction was preposterous, surely. After all, everyone loves turn-based JRPGs, or did they? From the mid-2000s to the mid-2010s, there was a notable shift in Western gaming discourse, one that often dismissed Japanese games, particularly JRPGs and anime-style aesthetics, as outdated, irrelevant, or outright inferior to Western-developed titles. This attitude was fueled by several factors, including changing industry trends, evolving technology, and the rise of the so-called cinematic gaming experience, championed by major Western studios. During this period, Western developers, particularly those in North America and Europe, were dominating the industry with highly polished big-budget games that focused on realistic graphics, Hollywood-style storytelling, and open-world design. Franchises like Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, The Elder Scrolls, and Mass Effect became the gold standard for what was considered a modern game. This was in stark contrast to Japanese game design, which still leaned into stylized art, turn-based combat, and mechanics that some Western audiences saw as archaic. Games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Persona continued to embrace their anime-like aesthetics, and often retained older RPG systems, which many in the West dismissed as relics of the past. This was a strange time, and in 2012, Phil Fish, creator of Fez, infamously stated that Japanese games just suck, reflecting a broader industry attitude of the time. Many gaming journalists and critics reinforced the idea that Japan was out of touch with modern gaming trends, particularly in how they handled storytelling, pacing, and mechanics. The rise of realistic graphics meant that many saw Japanese visuals as inherently childish, cheap, or weird. JRPGs were often stereotyped as having cringe-worthy stories, full of spiky-haired teens saving the world with melodramatic dialogue, while Western RPGs were praised for their mature themes and player-driven storytelling. This anti-anime sentiment also extended to online communities. Aesthetic elements that were seen as too Japanese, such as exaggerated character designs, high-pitched voices, or over-the-top action, were frequently ridiculed, and the term weeboo became an insult used to dismiss fans of Japanese games and culture as complete losers who were deserving of mockery. By mid-2010s, with games like Persona 5 and Nier Automata becoming mainstream hits, this attitude would begin to change, particularly with the very Japanese Nintendo Switch beginning to dominate conversations. By this point, the gaming media and players had started to re-evaluate their views, and the old Japan is outdated narrative gradually died out and became outdated itself. Ironically, many of the same critics who once dismissed JRPGs and anime-style games as outdated were now praising them as refreshing alternatives to the increasingly homogenized AAA Western market, which had become oversaturated with open-world maps, live service models, and microtransactions. But before the tides turned, this dismissive attitude arguably led to some questionable creative decisions, one of the most notable being Dirge of Cerberus. Square Enix, likely feeling the pressure to appeal to Western trends, took one of Final Fantasy VII's most mysterious characters and dropped him into a third-person shooter, a genre they had little experience with, just to prove they could keep up with the gritty, gun-heavy gaming landscape of the time. The result? A bizarre experiment that felt neither like a Final Fantasy game nor a great shooter, existing in an awkward middle ground between anime melodrama and Western action game bravado. In hindsight, Dirge of Cerberus serves as a perfect time capsule of an era where Japanese developers were desperately trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for them. So now we know why this abomination was in all likelihood made, let's dig further into its development. Vincent Valentine was chosen as the protagonist of Dirge of Cerberus because his backstory in Final Fantasy VII was shrouded in mystery, leaving plenty of room for expansion. After all, he was only an unlockable character in the original game, and lore around him was only built on in one side quest. His signature weapon, a gun, also made him the perfect fit for the team's vision of a more action-driven experience. Interestingly, before Final Fantasy VII's extended universe had fully taken shape, the developers considered other gun-wielding characters from across the series. Potential leads included Barrett Wallace from Final Fantasy VII, Irvin from Final Fantasy VIII, and even Yuna from Final Fantasy X-2, aka Second Amendment Yuna. However, as before Crisis and Advent Children fleshed out the world of Final Fantasy VII, the team ultimately decided that Vincent was the best choice. Let's be honest, likely because his brooding gothic aesthetic made him feel right at home in a game trying to ride a wave of mid-2000s edgy action. Tetsuya Nomura, who had previously worked on Final Fantasy VII and Advent Children, served as the lead character designer for the game. His goal was to establish a sense of balance between new characters against the already iconic figures of Vincent Valentine, Cloud Strife, and Sephiroth. Other classic Final Fantasy VII characters were also given a facelift. Lucrezia Crescent was redesigned to bear a stronger resemblance to her son Sephiroth, using official artwork and even fan interpretations as reference. Reeve, often seen through the lens of Cait Sith in the original game, was also given a more prominent visual identity to reflect his expanded role in Dirge of Cerberus. As the Final Fantasy series' first attempt at a shooter, Dirge of Cerberus faced plenty of development hurdles, with producer Yoshinori Kitase describing the process as particularly challenging. To help bridge the gap between traditional Final Fantasy fans and the new action-orientated gameplay, the team incorporated RPG elements, hoping to keep the experience engaging while still feeling like part of the franchise. In theory, it was supposed to be the perfect marriage of Final Fantasy storytelling and shooter mechanics. In practice, it felt like Final Fantasy had a midlife crisis, pulled a gun, and immediately regretted it. Since it seems this game was made with the West mostly in mind, when the game launched outside Japan, Square Enix made several gameplay adjustments to better suit Western audiences, refining mechanics and tweaking balance to improve the experience. These changes were well received enough that in 2008, the company re-released the game in Japan with all the Western updates included. Despite these efforts though, Dirge of Cerberus still landed with a mixed reception. While some players appreciated its attempt to expand Final Fantasy VII's lore, others found its sluggish shooting mechanics, uneven pacing, and tonal shift too jarring. So let's dig into exactly what it brought to the table. We'll dig into the story in a moment, since I consider that one of the most interesting aspects of this game, but first, let's talk gameplay. Blending third-person shooting with action RPG mechanics, the game puts players in control of Vincent Valentine as he battles through real-time combat scenarios. The game's heads-up display provides essential information, while a crosshair assists with targeting foes. Combat primarily unfolds from an over-the-shoulder perspective, reminiscent of Resident Evil 4, though players can switch to a first-person mode for a more direct shooting experience. Unsurprising to no one, playing Dirge of Cerberus feels like stepping into a game that isn't entirely sure what it wants to be. Right from the start, Vincent moves with a certain heaviness that makes precise aiming a chore. There's also an odd floatiness to the controls, resulting in a sluggish, often frustrating experience where landing shots doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as it should. Shooting lacks impact, bullets don't feel powerful, enemies often take way too many hits to go down, and the auto-aim often works against you rather than helping. The first-person mode offers slightly better precision, but it feels tacked on rather than a true gameplay alternative. In theory, you can customize Vincent's weapons with upgrades, but rather than making combat more engaging, it just feels like RPG stats trying to compensate for bad gameplay. Vincent's limit breaks make a return in Dirge of Cerberus, but in a significantly reduced capacity compared to the original game. In Final Fantasy VII, he had 4 distinct transformations, each with its own unique abilities, reflecting his mysterious and monstrous nature. However, Dirge of Cerberus cuts this down to just 2, which feels like a bit of a letdown given the expanded focus on his character. The first is Galleon Beast. where Vincent transforms into a hulking, bestial creature with enhanced strength and speed for 30 seconds, allowing for powerful melee attacks and energy projectiles. While visually striking, it lacks much depth beyond simply making Vincent hit harder. The second is Chaos, his ultimate form, which only becomes available towards the end of the game. While Chaos plays a major role in the game's story, its late game availability means we barely get to use it, making it feel more like a scripted power-up than a true gameplay mechanic. Instead of expanding on what made his transformations exciting in Final Fantasy VII, Dirge of Cerberus streamlines them to the point of feeling like an afterthought, limiting what could have been one of the game's most engaging mechanics. As for stage design, levels tend to be linear, uninspired corridors, with the occasional set piece that fails to add much excitement. Instead of rewarding exploration or offering memorable set pieces, most environments feel like bland, empty spaces, designed to simply funnel you to the next wave of enemies. It doesn't help that the game struggles with pacing, cutscenes, and slow sections which break up the action in a way that feels disruptive rather than cinematic. Essentially, the game features many issues that Japanese games stereotypically were known for at the time. When it comes to capturing the spirit of Final Fantasy VII's world, Dirge of Cerberus is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, the game leans heavily into the darker, grittier side of Final Fantasy VII's universe, so the gothic atmosphere, tone, and moody soundtrack certainly feels in line with Vincent's character, and returning locations like Calm and Midgar help ground the game in familiar territory. However, the bland level design and repetitive combat encounters fail to bring these environments to life. Where Final Fantasy VII thrived on exploration, world building, and player freedom, Dirge of Cerberus often feels restricted and lifeless, missing the sense of discovery that made the original game's world so immersive. It captures some of the aesthetic of Final Fantasy VII, but struggles to recreate the sense of adventure and wonder that defined it. Building on the main gameplay, there are stealth missions too, because of course there are, and they're exactly as bad as you'd expect in a game not designed for stealth. There are escort missions, because no mid-2000s action game was complete without them, and the worst offender, the turret sequences, which feel like the developers panicked and threw in whatever action tropes were trendy at the time. As stated though, JRPG elements would also be factored into this one, but unlike Final Fantasy VII, where characters could mix and match weapons, armor and accessories, Dirge of Cerberus simplifies Vincent's loadout. His weapon is everything. Instead of traditional gear, Vincent's gun serves as both his offensive and defensive tools, with customization playing a major role in shaping his playstyle. He has access to 3 primary firearm frames: Cerberus, a 3-barrel handgun for mid-range combat, Hydra, a powerful rifle built for long-range precision, and Griffin, a rapid-fire machine gun suited for close-quarters encounters. Each weapon can be modified with different barrels, ranging from short to long, with longer barrels improving range but weighing Vincent down, reducing his mobility. Customization doesn't stop there. Players can attach accessories to fine-tune performance. A sniper scope enhances accuracy, charms boost defense and reduce weapon weight, and materia upgrades allow Vincent to fire magic-infused rounds, adding elemental effects at the cost of MP. As the game progresses, his ammo capacity can be expanded, giving players more freedom to unload on enemies without constantly scavenging for supplies. It's an ambitious system that attempts to bring RPG-style depth to Dirge of Cerberus' gunplay, though whether it truly enhances the experience or just complicates an already clunky shooter is another question entirely. That said, Dirge of Cerberus gameplay isn't without its merits. While it's rough around the edges, there are some interesting ideas at play. The weapon customization and RPG progression attempts to add strategic depth, giving players some flexibility in how they approach combat. The blend of shooting mechanics with RPG elements may not be perfect, but it's clear the game was trying to do something unique, just not always successfully. Still, while the gameplay may be underwhelming, there's no denying that Dirge of Cerberus holds a unique place in Final Fantasy VII's legacy. This isn't just some spin-off that exists in a vacuum. This is a direct continuation of a story we all know and love, building on a world and characters of one of the most iconic RPGs of all time. For better or worse, it dares to push the narrative forward, diving into the hidden corners of Midgar's dark past and the mysteries surrounding Vincent Valentine. So for those of you who haven't played this one yet, I imagine you're eager to find out what actually happens. What secrets does Shinra still have buried beneath the ruins of Midgar? What horrors have been lurking in the shadows all this time? Let's unravel the tale. Just be prepared, because things are about to get weird. The game opens at the climax of the original Final Fantasy VII, plunging us straight into the chaos of Midgar's final moments. As Sephiroth's meteor looms overhead, threatening to obliterate the city, Vincent Valentine and Yuffie Kisaragi race to evacuate survivors, navigating the crumbling ruins in a desperate bid to escape. This opening scene is particularly poignant because it finally shows what happened to Vincent and Yuffie, two characters who were notably absent from Final Fantasy VII's ending. In the original game, when the party escaped Midgar and watched from a distance as Holy and the live stream clashed against Meteor, both Vincent and Yuffie were nowhere to be seen, leading to years of fan speculation. Their absence wasn't a mistake, but a result of how they were programmed in the original game. Since Vincent and Yuffie were optional party members, Square had to account for the possibility that some players might never recruit them. Instead of creating two separate versions of the ending, one where they were present and one where they weren't, the developers simply left them out altogether, ensuring consistency regardless of the player's choices. Dirge of Cerberus takes this long-standing mystery and fills in the gaps, revealing that while the rest of the party fled Shinra HQ, Vincent and Yuffie stayed behind to help evacuate Midgar's civilians. But amidst the destruction, Vincent stumbles upon something deeply unsettling: the lifeless body of Professor Hojo, slumped over the controls of the Sister Ray cannon. Then, a flash of lightning, in an instant, Hojo's body is gone. No sign of movement, no explanation, just emptiness where a corpse should be. Before Vincent can even begin to process what he's seen, a violent explosion tears through the cannon, forcing him and Yuffie to flee. It should have ended there. Hojo should have been dead. Midgar should have been left in the past. But 3 years later, Vincent will learn that some nightmares don't stay buried, and the plot of Dirge of Cerberus begins to unfold. Vincent Valentine finds himself in Calm, a town seemingly far removed from the chaos of Midgar's downfall. But the quiet doesn't last. Without warning, a ruthless military force descends upon the town. Their precision and brutality unlike anything Vincent has faced before. Explosions tear through the streets. Terrified civilians scramble for safety, and in the blink of an eye, Calm is turned into a war zone. As Vincent leaps into action, he is joined by an unexpected ally, Reeve, former Shinra executive turned leader of the World Regenesis Organization, or WRO, a group dedicated to restoring the planet after the devastation caused by Sephiroth's meteor. Together they push back against the mysterious invaders, forcing them to retreat, but the victory is hollow as many citizens are dead and even more have been taken. It quickly transpires that this was no random act of violence. It was a message, and whoever these soldiers are, they just made a dangerous enemy in Vincent Valentine. The attack on Calm was just the beginning. As the dust settles, Reeve reveals the truth. This wasn't some rogue faction or band of mercenaries. The attackers were Deep Ground, a top-secret Shinra Black Op unit created in the depths of Midgar to engineer the ultimate super soldiers. Hidden away for decades, Deep Ground has finally emerged, and for some reason, Vincent is one of their primary targets, which we will get into as to why in a moment. But wait, at this point you have to wonder, just how many secret soldier programs did Shinra have tucked away? We already had Soldier, the elite force powered by Mako infusions, with legends like Sephiroth, Zack and Cloud coming out of it. But apparently, this wasn't enough for Shinra. No, they also had Deep Ground, a hidden underground army of even more enhanced warriors, and somehow no one knew about them in the first game. Not the higher-ups, not the remnants of Shinra after Meteor, not even the survivors who lived right above their secret base in Midgar. It's almost comical, as if Shinra's entire business model revolved around building horrific bioweapons, then forgetting they existed until inevitably they crawled out of the shadows to wreak havoc. And now, after 3 years of silence, the latest batch of Shinra's forgotten nightmares come knocking, and they want something from Vincent. Still, at least Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade managed to retroactively smooth out some of the absurdity, weaving Deep Ground into the main story in a way that makes their sudden existence feel less like a last-minute retcon and more like a legitimate piece of the Final Fantasy VII puzzle, even though the reality is they are a retcon, but I digress. If Deep Ground was Shinra's best kept secret, then the VIIs were its crown jewels of human experimentation, a small elite force of genetically modified warriors engineered to be the absolute peak of combat perfection. More than just super soldiers, the VIIs are living weapons, each possessing inhuman strength, speed and resilience, making even Shinra's soldier, first-class operatives, look weak by comparison. But these weren't loyal foot soldiers, they were monsters with free will. And once Shinra fell, they weren't about to take orders from anyone. Each VIIt was colour-coded, denoting their rank and abilities, and Vincent takes on most of them throughout the story. Out of these we have Azul the Cerulean, the unstoppable juggernaut. He is essentially Deep Ground's tank, a towering mountain of brute force who can withstand insane amounts of damage. His raw power and resilience make him an unbreakable wall, capable of cutting down entire battalions single-handedly. On top of his sheer physical dominance, Azul has a bestial transformation, allowing him to become an even deadlier monstrosity, turning Deep Ground's enemies into nothing more than splattered remains. We then have Rosso the Crimson, the bloodthirsty psychopath, a sadistic killer engineered for maximum carnage. Rosso lived for nothing but bloodshed, taking immense pleasure in tearing her enemies apart literally. Fueled by rage and a burning hatred for the weak, Rosso wasn't just a killer, she was a storm of death, reveling in violence, cruelty and destruction. Her unpredictability made her a walking massacre, and even among the other VIIs, she was seen as dangerously unstable. But still, I reckon half of you are still watching at home today thinking, I can fix her. Then we have the lads we were made familiar with in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Weiss the Immaculate, the Tyrant King, is the strongest of them all and the leader of Deep Ground, a flawless warrior both in power and physique, making him essentially unstoppable in combat. Unlike the rest of Shinra's soldier operatives, Weiss had no reliance on Mako injections. His power was purely biological modification, making him faster, stronger and more durable than any warrior before him. But it wasn't just his strength that made him terrifying, it was his lust for total domination. After Shinra fell, Weiss broke free from the chains of his creators, slayed his handlers and took full control of Deep Ground, setting the VIIs on a warpath against the world. Nero the Sable, the living abyss, is Weiss's younger brother. Nero is pure chaos wrapped in darkness. Born as a result of horrific experiments, Nero's body is unstable, constantly bleeding shadowy tendrils of living darkness, which he can use to devour anything and anyone. Those swallowed by his void don't just die, they cease to exist. But beneath these terrifying powers, Nero is deeply obsessed with Weiss, seeing him as the only thing he truly loves. He is fiercely loyal to his brother, following him into battle without question, even if it means embracing oblivion. Finally, there is Shulk the Transparent, the unlikely rebel. Unlike the others, Shulk wasn't a VIIt by choice. She was a child experimented on and turned into one. As a data specialist, Shulk's mind was hacked into the digital network, allowing her to extract information and interact with systems beyond human capabilities. But unlike the others, Shulk was never truly loyal to Deep Ground. Unlike Rosso or Azul, who relished in violence, Shulk was a victim, forcibly transformed into a tool of war. When she was captured by the WRO, she slowly began to break free from Deep Ground's control, ultimately turning against her former masters and aiding Vincent in his fight. So why had Deep Ground after Vincent? The reason? The proto-materia. Which is what exactly, you may ask? Well, Vincent has seemingly unknowingly carried this mysterious substance inside him for years, an artifact of immense power that allows him to control the Chaos Gene, the monstrous force slumbering within him. You see, back in the original Final Fantasy VII game, the story outlines that decades before the events of that title, Vincent used to be a Turk, part of Shinra's elite covert operations unit. He was assigned to oversee the Genova project in Nibelheim, where he met Lucrezia Crescent, a scientist working alongside Professor Hojo. Vincent fell in love with Lucrezia, but she ultimately chose to align herself with Hojo, who saw her as a valuable asset in his twisted experiments. She even agreed to become the test subject for Hojo's most infamous project, injecting her unborn child with Genova cells, leading to the creation of Sephiroth. Vincent, disgusted by Hojo's actions and desperate to save Lucrezia, tried to intervene, but Hojo shot him in cold blood and used his body for experimentation. In an act of cruel scientific curiosity, Hojo implanted the Chaos gene into Vincent, transforming him into something no longer fully human. As a result, Vincent gained unnatural longevity, superhuman abilities, and monstrous limit break transformations, but was left haunted by his new existence. Racked with guilt for failing to protect Lucrezia, he sealed himself inside a coffin in Shinra Mansion, choosing self-imposed exile rather than facing the world, until Cloud and his party discovered him inside the basement of the Shinra Mansion years later. By the end of Final Fantasy VII, Vincent comes to terms with his past, but he remains an enigma, with many aspects of his story left unexplored. He starts as a man driven purely by revenge, but his journey with Cloud and the others give him a greater sense of purpose. Dirge of Cerberus picks up where this unfinished story left off, putting Vincent in the spotlight and diving deeper into his origins, his connections to Chaos, and his role in the planet's future. But Deep Ground isn't just after Chaos. They want something worse: Omega. According to ancient texts, Chaos and Omega are inextricably linked. Chaos is described as Omega's squire to the lofty heavens, a force of destruction that serves a greater yet still unknown cosmic purpose. And Vincent? He was never meant to wield this power, but does so as a result of the past experiments. Now, as Deep Ground closes in, Vincent is forced to confront not just the horrors buried beneath Midgar, but the secrets locked within his own body, and the terrifying fate that awaits him. The deeper Vincent digs, the darker the truth becomes. Determined to uncover the secrets behind Deep Ground's motives, Vincent travels to Nibelheim, the very place where his tragic past began. Within the cold, abandoned halls of Lucrezia's hidden research lab, he searches for answers. But before he can get too far, he's not alone. Like a crimson blur, Ross over Crimson ambushes him. With terrifying speed and inhuman strength, she overpowers Vincent, ripping the proto-materia from his body, the very thing that allows him to control Chaos. Stripped of his lifeline, Vincent is left on the brink of death, and Rosso moves in for the kill. Just as it seems like his fate is sealed, a flash of steel and a blur of motion interrupts the slaughter. Yuffie arrives just in time to save the day, but there's no time to celebrate. Returning to WRO's headquarters, they arrive to find it under siege. Deep Ground's forces have launched an all-out assault, their ruthless soldiers tearing through WRO's defences with brutal efficiency. However, amid the chaos, the WRO has managed to capture one of Deep Ground's own, Shulk the Transparent, and what she reveals changes everything. Through a synaptic link to Lucrezia's memories, Shulk holds the key to completing Lucrezia's research on Omega, and the truth is far worse than anyone could have imagined. Omega isn't just another Shinra superweapon, it's a planetary failsafe. As Xiaolhua Rui, a top scientist in the WRO, pieces it together, the horror of Deep Ground's true plan is revealed. Omega is a weapon, just like the huge creatures we fought valiantly against in the original game. But this one is not meant just to protect the planet. Oh no. Instead, it is the ultimate reset button. The Great Reset! When the planet senses that it's on the brink of destruction, Omega awakens, drains the entire lifestream, and carries it to another world, leaving everything and everyone behind to die. And Deep Ground? They intend to cheat fate. By slaughtering an unimaginable number of people at once, they plan to trick the planet into believing it's time to activate Omega early, wiping out all life before its time. Obviously, the scale of the threat is beyond anything Vincent has ever faced. Well, except for Sephiroth at least anyway. The clock is ticking, and the entire planet is now standing at the edge of oblivion once again. With time running out, and the fate of the planet hanging by a thread, Vincent and the WRO launch a full-scale assault on Deep Ground's headquarters in the ruins of Midgar. If you thought life beneath the plate in Midgar was bad, then Deep Ground takes the dystopian nightmare and cranks it up a whole new level. Because beneath the slums, beneath the reactors, beneath even the filth and rubble of the city's forgotten corners lies something even worse. A secret Shinra facility so horrifying that even the company's highest ranking officials barely acknowledge its existence. Deep Ground, the literal bottom of the abyss. Originally designed as a top-secret medical facility for Shinra's most elite soldier operatives, Deep Ground was never meant to see the light of day. Over time, it transformed into something far more sinister, a hidden fortress dedicated to creating the ultimate super soldiers, free from the limitations of morality, oversight, or even basic human decency. While Shinra paraded Soldier as their proud, honourable military force, Deep Ground was their true masterpiece of human experimentation. a shadow army, engineered entirely underground where failure meant death and survival meant being turned into something monstrous. No sunlight, no fresh air, no escape. From this you can quickly establish why deep ground members are so mentally screwed up. Down in the depths, recruits weren't just trained, they were broken, reshaped into something beyond human through ruthless genetic experiments, Mako infusions, and cybernetic enhancements. Those who weren't strong enough were discarded, slaughtered or worse, used for further experiments. There were no civilians in deep ground, no innocent bystanders, everyone down there was either a soldier, a prisoner or a test subject. And the worst part, nobody on the surface had a clue. The slums were a nightmare, deep ground was hell. And now, after years in the shadows, it has finally risen to the surface. With Vincent down below, the mission was clear: shut down the Mako reactors fueling Omega's awakening, and put an end to Deep Ground's twisted ambitions once and for all. While Reeve and his forces battled through the relentless waves of Deep Ground soldiers, Vincent carved his way into the heart of their operations, heading straight for the one behind it all, VII the Immaculate. But when Vincent reached Deep Ground's core, what he found was not what he expected. VII was already dead, slumped over in his throne, his lifeless body a stark contrast to the all-powerful warrior Vincent had prepared to fight. But before he could make sense of what was happening, the ground trembled, Omega stirred, and what was seemingly the end began. And then finally, VII moved, rising to his feet, his eyes burning with a sinister new presence. VII was very much alive, but not on his own will. You see, it wasn't actually VII at all, it's Hojo. Yes, Professor Hojo, Shinra's most deranged scientist, is still alive, in a way. Before his death 3 years ago at the Sister Ray Cannon, Hojo did what no mad scientist before him had dared. He uploaded his consciousness into the worldwide network, discarding his mortal body and existing as a digital mind. When VII went online in search of a cure for the virus that once held him captive, Hojo struck, hijacking his body and taking full control. Now, standing before Vincent, Hojo somehow returned, more twisted than ever, wearing VII's body like a puppet and hell-bent on becoming one with Omega to transcend mortality itself. What follows is an earth-shattering battle between Vincent and Hojo VII, a clash of raw power and desperation that pushes both to their limits. But even as they fight to a standstill, the true horror unfolds. Just when it seems that Hojo's grip on VII's unshakable, a familiar presence returns, Nero the Sable, VII's own brother, who Vincent had defeated earlier in battle, who also appeared in Remake recently. Emerging from the livestream itself, Nero obliterates Hojo, breaking his control over VIII in an act of defiance and brotherly love, but the victory is short-lived. With Omega now fully awakening, VIII and Nero make a final choice. Instead of resisting, Nero merges with his brother, allowing VIII to fuse with Omega and trigger its accession. At the same time, the power that has been lying dormant within Vincent is fully unleashed. He merges with Chaos, becoming the one thing capable of stopping Omega's rise. For the first time, he doesn't resist it, he becomes it. As Omega takes flight, preparing to leave the planet behind as nothing more than a hollow husk, Vincent, now fully one with Chaos, launches a desperate final assault, but even with his newfound strength, Omega is unstoppable. It is a planetary failsafe after all, a force beyond human comprehension. Victory seems impossible. As Dirge of Cerberus reaches its climax, Cloud Strife and Avalanche arrive to hold back Deep Ground's forces, giving Vincent a clear path to face Omega VIII. Though brief, Cloud's presence is symbolic, passing the torch to Vincent as the new hero. Tifa Lockhart fights alongside him, reinforcing Avalanche's ongoing mission, while Barrett Wallace brings heavy firepower, ensuring Deep Ground doesn't get a second chance at world domination. Sid Highwind provides air support, keeping the WRO's operation running smoothly. While they aren't the focus, their presence cements Avalanche's continued fight to protect the planet, and it's a nice moment of fan service no matter how cheesy. But then a glimmer of hope from within. Chelk, having connected herself to Lucrezia's memories, does the unthinkable. She dives into the very heart of Omega, searching for something buried deep within, and she finds it, the proto-materia, the very thing that allowed Vincent to control Chaos in the first place. Before Omega can fully ascend, Chelk returns to him, delivering a final message. Your survival made Lucrezia happy. With those words, Vincent finds the strength to push forward. No longer shackled by regret, no longer a prisoner of the past, he takes full control of Chaos, not as a curse, but as a weapon. He clashes with Omega in a final cataclysmic battle, striking at the very heart of a cosmic entity as it begins to break free from the planet. Omega rises, chaos follows. With one final blow, Vincent destroys Omega, unraveling its ascent and sending it crashing back into the livestream. But as the dust settles, he is gone. For a week, there is no sign of Vincent. No one knows if he survived. But then, far away, in the secluded crystal cave, he reappears, standing before Lucrezia's crystalline tomb. In a quiet, solemn moment, he acknowledges what has happened. Chaos and Omega have returned to the planet. The nightmare is over, but Vincent's journey is not. He thanks Lucrezia, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. For the first time in decades, he is alive, not just in body, but in spirit. As he steps outside, he finds Shelk waiting for him. She tells him that the others are waiting, reminding him that for the first time in a long time, he has a place to return to. Vincent Valentine, the man who had once sealed himself away in a coffin to escape the past, has finally stepped back into the world. And there's a secret ending too, which is so frankly ridiculous that I'm actually going to do a follow-up video on it at some point, so subscribe for that one. Despite all the criticisms I'm about to throw at Dirge of Cerberus' story, how it interrupts gameplay, how it's wildly over the top, how it leans into every melodramatic JRPG storytelling trope imaginable, I can't deny that it's entertaining. It may not be a narrative masterpiece, but its story is never boring, and in a game where the shooting mechanics often feel sluggish and uninspired, the sheer ridiculousness of the plot actually keeps things engaging. Yes, it's filled with what they called in the mid-2010s anime absurdity, and yes, it has exaggerated villains with ridiculous names, overly dramatic monologues, and a protagonist drowning in brooding self-loathing. We also can't deny the bad pacing, which frequently yanks control away from us just so we can watch Vincent glare at things while ominous music plays. But somehow, it works. It's campy, ridiculous, and dripping with early 2000s edginess. But if you embrace the chaos, it's genuinely fun to watch unfold. In an era where JRPGs were being dismissed as cringeworthy, melodramatic, and too anime, Dirge of Cerberus went all in on those exact elements, yet tries to merge that with third-person shooting mechanics that feel awkwardly tacked on, creating an experience that feels like two completely different genres forced together. The result? A game that's as fascinating as it is flawed. A JRPG desperately trying to be a shooter while still unapologetically indulging in every anime trope imaginable, completely unashamed of what it's doing. And honestly, that makes it kind of awesome. It's an awful sequel when we consider that it's the direct follow-up to arguably the greatest piece of storytelling in gaming history. But if you're going to be a glorified anime action game with guns, monsters, and over-the-top villains, you might as well lean into it with everything you've got. And Dirge of Cerberus absolutely does that. I'm not even mad. That's amazing. If you're still here by this point, I guess you're mildly entertained, so subscribe and check out my uploads on Final Fantasy X free and the lost now unplayable Final Fantasy VII prequel. Also, if you haven't played the newest Final Fantasy VII games, I highly recommend you do. You can even experience the new Deep Ground lore in those. Remember that by using my affiliate link, you can get a massive 45% off the newly released PC version of Rebirth, along with big discounts on the Remake Rebirth Twin Pack, which also includes intermission. Save big on thousands of games using my links, and happy shopping and cheerio!